Welcome back to Deprogrammed. This is the New Culture Forum show where we do our best to fight back against the forces of ideological conformity, particularly among the young. My name is Harrison Pitt. I'm a senior editor at the European Conservative, and I'm joined today, as ever, by Connor Tomlinson, the host of Tomlinson Talks at thelotuseaters.com, and our special guest this week, Harry Miller, a former police officer and the co-founder of Fair Cop. Now, Harry, thank you for joining Connor and me today. Rather than police our borders or honour the long-standing wishes of the British people to see immigration seriously curtailed, Yvette Cooper has signalled her intention to re-expand the recording of non-crime hate incidents. You have personal experience with these very Orwellian tools of ideological enforcement. Where do you see this going?
Right, okay. I think the first thing is worth just defining what a non-crime hate incident is, because it's so abstract, and the name itself, a non-crime hate incident, which is something that the police enforce, it has all sorts of dystopian, Orwellian implications, because what is a non-crime for starters? Well, a non-crime is defined by the College of Policing as any incident which does not meet the threshold of a crime, but is nevertheless perceived by the victim, again, what victim, or any other person as being motivated by hate towards a certain group of people, most specifically people who are trans, people who are on the basis of their disability, on the basis of their race, their ethnicity, or their sexual orientation. So this means in practice that anything at all can be perceived as being hateful, anything. So back in 2019, what brought me to the attention of homicide police was that someone had taken exception to the fact that I'd retweeted a feminist lyric. Now, the police called it a limerick. It wasn't a limerick. Maybe it self-identified as a limerick. I don't know. But it pointed out some truths about trans people, and it said, your breasts are made of silicon, your vagina goes nowhere. Both things which are absolutely, provably true. But because somebody somewhere perceived this to be me expressing hatred towards the transgender community, the police took the complaint seriously and turned up at my place of work at the Port of Immingham to check my thinking. They told me that even though I had not committed a crime, that my speech was so hateful and so close to being a crime that if they didn't intervene and check my thinking, then it would escalate to a crime. Now, I asked them what crime it would escalate to, and they said, well, the murder of Stephen Lawrence and genocide. And I'm not even kidding. That's what they said.
Just to put a fine point on it.
So me retweeting somebody else's limerick was likely to lead to genocide. Now, it wasn't just that. It turns out that they'd collected 30 expressions that I'd made on Twitter. One of them was simply, Sheffield women know the difference between lads and lasses. Now, if you know Sheffield women, as I do, you do know that they know the difference between lads and lasses. But again, the police decided that this was indicative of my future genocidal career, and they needed to put a stop to it. I was also somewhat flippant and sarcastic at one point in that I tweeted, I was assigned mammal at birth, but I identify as a fish. Please don't misspecies me, motherfuckers. And they said that this was me flying the flag to show my future murderous behaviour, and that trans people in my company, trans people in my vicinity, trans people who'd seen me on Twitter were not safe because I was clearly a killer in the making. And it gets worse than that, because if the shame of being recorded on a police database marked as hate, being marked down as a hater, that's bad enough. I mean, no sane person, no law-abiding citizen wants to be on a police database as a hater. But it got worse. We discovered that these so-called non-crime hate incidents were disclosable on an enhanced DBS check. That means that if I'd applied for a job within the third sector, within education, within the charitable sector, working with children or vulnerable people, there is a fair chance that that application would stall on the basis that the chief constable would release that information to my prospective employer, telling them that, in effect, that I was a danger to the public. So we discovered that since 2014, by 2019, there had been 125,000 of these non-crime hate incidents liberally scattered around the public by the police. It may be that you were lucky and learnt about it, as I did, or it may be that you were unlucky and knew nothing about it. You simply wondered why the job applications you were putting in were going absolutely nowhere.
Because crucially then, not obligated to inform.
No, there's no
people.
obligation to tell you whatsoever. No obligation at all. So, in effect, I uncovered, by challenging the police and simply not accepting this, I uncovered this absolute, I don't know how do you describe it, this stain on the public that was based on nothing other than how somebody else had perceived them, and the police's gross miscalculation that without their intervention, there was a genocide in the making. Now, by 2021, we estimate there'd been 250,000 non-crime hate incidents. I went to the High Court. I took the police, the Chief Constable of Humberside and the College of Policing to the High Court and then the Court of Appeal. And the non-crime hate incidents were ruled as being unlawful in the main. There would be some exceptions. The police could record non-crime hate incidents where they genuinely believed that the conversation that they'd overheard or had been reported to them, whilst not quite criminal, clearly indicated future criminality. Well, we never argued against that because, as far as I'm concerned, that's one of the jobs that the police should do, which is collate information. But it has to be good information.
And can I just say as well, these just to inform viewers, these were an autonomous creation of the police in 2014, and it presumably wasn't only in 2014 that police discovered that it was worthwhile collating information on potential future criminals. In other words, there are other ways of going about trying to preempt crime, as the police have a role to do, than inventing these very Orwellian instruments, as they did themselves autonomously in 2014, the College of Policing. That's
right. This was a knee-jerk reaction to the Macpherson report, which said that the Metropolitan Police in particular were institutionally racist. And the problem was that following the murder of Stephen Lawrence, it was discovered, I think quite rightly and with some justification, that the police had a tendency to treat the black community as perpetrators of crime and to dismiss their concerns as victims. Now, that may or may not have been the case. I rather suspect it probably was the case at the time. But this was in the 1990s. It's a long time ago. Since then, we've had the 2010 Equality Act. We've had an awful lot of changes in society since then. But I think the police, under a massive burden of guilt, self-recrimination, etc., tried to get ahead of the curve, tried to preempt that kind of accusation. I think it was a form of protecting themselves far more than it was ever a genuine attempt to protect victims. I think it was the police seeking to protect themselves.
Can I push back on that slightly? Just because I remember reading a Civitas report shortly after the Macpherson report, and you would have known how it would have been implemented, of course, at the time. But they said that Macpherson didn't find any systemic, like rules-based discrimination against non-white officers within the Met. They didn't find any mistreatment of suspects along the lines of race. A lot of the evidence was consulting Met police officers and asking them to confess to private racist thoughts and even telepathically divine racist thoughts in their colleagues, which therefore led to disparate outcomes. And so they infer from that racism occurred. And it was also, as you said, only the Metropolitan Police. Now they've extrapolated it across pretty much all of the different police departments. If I remember correctly, the recent Free Speech Union data found that of 30 of the 43 police bodies in England and Wales, they'd been recording non-crime hate incidents at an increased rate even after your case.
Yeah.
So as far as I can understand it, and I'm happy to be corrected, the Macpherson report seems to have been based on shoddy evidential grounds to dig the Met Police out of a hole because of the murder of Stephen Lawrence, and now we seem to be all paying the price for it.
I'm not entirely sure that I agree with that. I think there was a fair degree of racism within the police in the 1990s. I was a police officer in the early 1990s, and in Humberside there was quite a lot of racism and sexism, and I imagine that there was right across the country. I think that's just there was in society, and where society is, if the police are the public and the public are the police, then the attitudes in the general wider public will be reflected within the police. But regardless of whether there was or whether there was not systemic racism or sexism or what have you within the police, this is a long time ago. This is a quarter of a century ago now. So that entire generation of police officers are no longer police officers. We've got a different police force now. In effect, it's regenerated, it's renewed itself, and I don't think that the racism is there as it was. I think it's been replaced by other forms of ism. I think there is now, for instance, a high degree of whiteism within the police. I think there's a fair amount of conservatism within the police, where the police are systemically programmed to dislike and mistrust, particularly males, white, middle-aged males. They are definitely pre-programmed not to trust anyone who goes by the religion of Christian, and they're definitely pre-programmed to overtrust anyone who is trans or a Muslim or any of the characteristics which they seem to have elevated as having special status. So they've replaced one set of problems with another. That's the best that the McPherson report can have done, is that it's caused the police to change one set of failures for another set of failures. And now it's a different group of people, the likes of you and I, who are most at risk of coming to the unnecessary and unwanted attention of the police, whereas decades previously, it was a different group.
So building on those suspicions, if you can maybe help my understanding here, after your case, these non-crime hate incidents were ruled as unlawful. I remember the judge in the case compared the way the British police were operating with the Stasi in East Germany.
Actually, not just the Stasi. He compared them to the Stasi, the Cheka, and the Gestapo. Three of the seminal, terrifying, terrible police forces of the last century. To be compared to one would be bad enough. To be compared to three, I would say, is a absolute disaster for the police. And yet, the police response to the ruling was very, very limited.
Well,
very limited.
They tried to issue their own guidance from the College of Policing in 2022, if I remember correctly. And your co-founder wrote a very scathing report of that on Fair Cop. And Suella Braverman, then Home Secretary, tried to incorporate some new guidance into the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, passed in 2023.
And he put it on a statutory footing for the first time.
Exactly. And then the College of Policing's own guidance in response to that statutory footing was to say, yeah, we'll inform everyone of these non-crime hate incidents, but only if the victim, they still called it a victim, if disclosing their identity and the information doesn't put them at risk. Well, who defines at risk? Those exact same heads of the College of Policing that think you or I are on the precipice of committing a transgender genocide, for example. Yeah. So is that why the non-crime hate incidents went up, despite the guidance to tell them to be more cautious?
Well, actually, following Suella Braverman's intervention, the College of Policing did, several months later, issue the 2023 guidance. And Toby Young and I, who'd been monitoring this, we rang each other and said, I can't quite believe what we're reading, because it pretty much gave us everything that we asked for in writing, in the letter of it. The problem is it has not been dispersed amongst the rank and file constables. So they're simply not aware of it. Whereas the old hate crime, which was based on perception and recording non-crime hate incidents, every police officer in the country had that hammered into them, that it was an alternative form of justice. If you couldn't get somebody for a crime, get them for this. There was no re-education about free speech. There was no re-education about the protections of Article 10 and my ruling and the Court of Appeal and the High Court, etc. There was no systematic re-education of police officers into why these sort of interventions caused chief constables to be likened to the Stasi, the Cheka, and the Gestapo. So whilst the guidance exists, it exists on a dusty shelf somewhere, or it exists deep within a police computer. When it comes to the practical outworking of the Court of Appeal ruling and the new guidance, it's had very, very little effect. The one effect that it has had, I have to say, is very draconian. What I predicted and what has actually happened is this, that because the police since then have been a little bit unsure about non-crime hate incidents, a little bit uncertain of the footing, and knowing full well that it was certainly open to challenge, what the police have been doing is knocking on people's door and not accusing them of a non-crime, but accusing them of a crime. So they've escalated the problem. Let's talk about the Newcastle United supporter, the lesbian from Newcastle, Lindsay Smith. I don't know if you're aware of that case, but round about October or November last year, the police knocked on her door and invited her for a voluntary interview based on her social media output. Now, she's a massive Newcastle United fan, huge Newcastle United fan. And what she'd said on her Twitter account, that she was LGB, not LGBT. She's a good old-fashioned lesbian. She rang me. I rang the police officer up and said, look, unless you've got something a little bit solid, then I don't think you need to be inviting my client, Lindsay Smith, for an interview. I said, have you considered the Miller ruling? And he said, no. I said, have you considered the latest statutory guidance? And he said, no. I said, have you considered the latest College of Policing guidance around hate? He said, no. I said, right, I will send all of these to you right now. You can have a little consideration of them. And if you still think, having considered, that you want to interview my client, then if you get in touch with me, we'll both come in next week. But I don't think that will happen, because I think the guidance that I'm sending you is very, very plain, and that will be the end of it. I went to bed quite happy. I assured Lindsay that she got nothing to worry about at all. And then I woke up the following morning, and the first, opened up my phone. The police came back to her house that night. 2 police officers at 9 o'clock at night said they'd read the guidance, they'd read the Miller ruling, and had concluded that this meant that she must be arrested, not simply warned. And they told her that unless she came in voluntarily, they would arrest her and take her in for questioning. I spoke to her. I said, right, go in voluntarily, give a no-comment interview throughout, but take your phone in and record it. Record the entire thing and send it to me. She did that. They said there were 10 tweets. They said that they were they were investigating her for the Malicious Communications Act.
2003, wasn't it?
No, this was 1998.
Oh, right.
One, I think it was. And they went through and said, right, okay, you say you're LGB, not LGBT. Do you think anybody could find that offensive? No comment. You say that you're glad that you're not, that you're glad that you never joined in the monstrous mutilation of children's bodies. Do you not find that? Do you think somebody could find that offensive? There was 10 of these things. Okay, 10, all just like that. Now here's the thing: for it to be malicious communications is defined as when person A sends to person B a communication which is grossly offensive, etc., etc. There was no question about her, person A, having sent to person B anything, nothing at all. It could not possibly, even if it was a crime, it wasn't that crime. It couldn't have been that crime. It was impossible for it to have been that crime. Now, what happened was she was released, and late that night she was sent a handwritten letter from the police officer, which was dropped off sometime around midnight by hand, we believe, at her flat, that said, we're not taking this any further pending further investigation. That was that.
We're sorry, please don't make a public incident out of
No,
this.
not even that. No, not even that. pending further investigation. So we're not doing anything right now, but you're still being investigated.
So a chilling effect.
So the chilling effect. Now, it turns out that the complainant in this case was Newcastle United. Newcastle United had complained to the police that they had a transphobe sitting in the family stand, and that as a result of that, Newcastle United wasn't a safe place for trans people to be. So it was Newcastle United, in collaboration with Northumbria Police, who colluded to criminalise one of their supporters. Newcastle United banned her for 3 years.
What about the Saudi Wahhabis in the executive box? I mean,
yeah, exactly.
You would have thought that's pretty threatening to...
Well, I can't imagine the amount of non-crime hate incidents they're going to have to issue at a Tottenham Hotspurs v Arsenal game, given the chance to go on there. I mean...
Exactly. What? There was no suggestion that she'd committed anything within the stadium, any form of offence within the stadium or within football general. It was just that somebody from Newcastle United, the club, had been on her Twitter account and said, "Oh, she's a transphobe," and they worked with the police to have her de facto criminalised. And get this, Toby Young found this out through subject access requests. Newcastle United and the police had used a Singaporean spy agency together with the Premier League. I think it was Premier League, or the FA. I think it was the Premier League, to spy on her and collate as much information as possible, including where she walked her dog, where she lived, all the rest of it. That's true.
That's absolutely looking at my Twitter account.
So what we've done, we've split it in two. Toby and the Free Speech Union are doing the Newcastle United element of this, and Fair Cop are taking the Chief Constable of Northumbria, Vanessa Jardine, to the High Court. Now, we gave her an ultimatum. We said, A, apologise to Lindsay Smith, and B, disassociate yourself entirely, your force entirely from Pride. And if you march in Pride this year, and if you go in, if you have sort of rainbow painted cars and all the rest of it, then we will take you to judicial review. Anyway, Pride was just a couple of months ago in Newcastle, and she was there. She was there with her police force. They had a police car there decked out in the trans colours. They had a prison van there decked out in the trans colours. They had a picture frame there in the trans colours that you could have yourself photographed with a police officer there. What they weren't expecting, and they still don't really know, that I was there in full drag, marching alongside the chief constable. She's no idea about this as yet, with a pink wig on, my lippy on, with a T-shirt that says "No Turf Zone" and a big cardboard sign that says "Make Turfs Afraid Again." And the chief constable has no idea that she marched alongside me with that. So she's going to be somewhat shocked, I think. I think shock and awe is going to be the order of the day when she reads the High Court submissions and sees the evidence of me there. Also, not just that, but me in the picture frame with a no turf zone. Or something there. I just posed with loads of police officers.
Does this photo exist online anywhere yet? Or
no, it doesn't yet.
Okay.
No. We've kept it. We've kept it.
We'll be treated to this post-trial.
I'll show you later, though. Yeah, it's pretty good. And Lindsay Smith was there taking photographs, and she was dressed as a hot dog. So they had absolutely no idea that we were there. So that's quite interesting, really. I say you never quite know. A little bit like the Inquisition. You never know that we're going to. Nobody expects the Inquisition, and nobody expects Harry Miller turning up dressed like a crazed, deranged, pink-wigged drag artist, or one of their suspects dressed as a hot dog. But this is what we've been reduced to, Connor, behaving like this to catch the police out. I mean, fortunately, they really are dim, and so it doesn't take that much genius or cunning to catch them out. Do you remember in February I infiltrated a Staffordshire police hate crime course at Staffordshire headquarters, They'd no idea that it was me, which was really quite interesting.
You'd expect them to have like your photo like behind the bar.
They had no idea it was me. And I managed to, what was really good is I managed to keep my mouth shut all the way till about 3:00. And this was this was a long session. And it was only when they played a black rap artist at us, who was rapping that, what was it he was saying? What was it? The essential characteristic of a hate crime is not hate, it's prejudice. And it was like, they was going like, there's violence in the silence and all this sort of stuff. And everybody's there, everybody who was there, all these sort of hate crime trainees, we were being taught to recognise hate crime whenever we saw it. Everybody's getting all misty-eyed over this. And then the trainer made the mistake of saying, "No, Harry, what did you think?" I said, "Do you want my honest view?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "It was unadulterated, utter, absolute shite and has no place whatsoever in a so-called police headquarters. I've never seen anything quite so shit ever. And I cannot believe that you are teaching these so-called hate crime champions this complete and utter bullshit." I shut him up.
Yeah, that went down. Like
that went down well. Yeah, it was at that point that my cover was blown. Somebody said, "You think you know more than everybody else," and I said, "That's because I do." So the course was quickly withdrawn. I posted about it the following day. Staffordshire Police went into absolute meltdown. And their response, their response was, there was another thing as well. We get this. We were taught that there are 256 different forms of unconscious bias. They didn't tell us what they were, but they did say that all forms of unconscious bias are wrong. And I gingerly put my hand up and said, "Well, are they all wrong? Are they all wrong all the time?" They said, "Oh, yes." I said, "Right, I'm just going to give you an example." So there's a woman walking down a city street at night, and her unconscious bias tells her that the footsteps that she can hear behind her are the footsteps of a male. And so in order to protect herself, she takes evasive action and nips into a pub. I said, "Surely that's unconscious bias working in a positive way." And they said, "Well, no, because what she did was akin to racism. What happens if it was black footsteps?" Like, what? Are you having a laugh?
Some particularly squeaky sneakers, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. So once I published this online, we got it in the newspapers and all the rest of it. The following week, Staffordshire Police put out a thing saying that they were running the course again, and this time it was for only local people, and that the likes of Harry Miller, who had come from out of town, of course, were not to be there. This was for local people dealing with local crime and local hate.
Like the trans community, obviously, entirely live locally.
Yeah, exactly.
This is extremely interesting, and I think it helps explain, because I think a lot of people struggle to understand why it is that, and I think you put it perfectly, the kind of the dusty letter of the law seems in certain instances just to be completely irrelevant. The police are increasingly, we had Toby Young on a couple of weeks ago, in fact. He said that they're increasingly pickled in this ideology in a way which is not technically law governed. There is no sort of law in the statute book which says you must maximally wokeify the police or anything like that. But nevertheless, there is this police culture. Who is responsible for that existing? And who puts these resources together, these gimmicky rap videos, all this stuff which police officers, as you say, go misty-eyed over? And that would explain why there is this sort of two-tier policing system.
I think a lot of it boils down to a guilt from the Macpherson report. I really do. I think the police were so shocked by that, so appalled by that it gave a lot of young officers who were hell bent on promotion at any cost, as well as good officers wanting promotion, something to hang their ambitions on, and so socially re-engineering the police became a very good way of getting a promotion. The problem is, once you've socially re-engineered the police, what do? Do you stop? Well, no, because your next impulse is to socially re-engineer the public, because if the police are the public and the public are the police, why would you not want to do that? I think things were also aided in, I think it was 2002. There was a police act, and one of the things that the Police Act did was it changed the oath of attestation that all new constables have to take. Now, in the past, what a police officer did was that they swore allegiance to the sovereign, and they promised to uphold the law and the Queen's or the King's peace to the best of their ability. Since 2002, however, the oath changed, and it's now upholding the law and human rights. So now police are sworn to the sovereign to uphold the law and human rights. Now, that's fine if the law and human rights entirely intersect, but they don't. Certain so-called human rights are not yet established in law. And you have people like Amnesty, you have people like Stonewall, you have people like Black Lives Matter, you have people who the pro-Palestinian lobby, you have the eco lot, the Just Stop Oil lot, all of them hanging their cause on human rights. So this leaves the police officer with a dilemma. He knows he's got to uphold the law, but now he's also expected to uphold human rights. Which human rights does he uphold, and which human rights does he not uphold? And this is down to a political choice by chief constables. This is why chief constables are now fundamentally political, because they have to be to fulfill that oath of attestation. They've got to make a decision, it seems, as to which human rights have the same importance as law and need enforcing, and which can be ignored because, whatever. So I think that's also the problem. We also have the Equality Act, which is a massive problem. I think as it was intended, it was seeking to do quite a noble thing, and that was to gather up all the previous acts, the Disability Act, and blah, 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 and get them into one act. And it had 9 protected characteristics. The trouble is, with those 9 protected characteristics, whilst some of them are, they genuinely are immutable characteristics. For instance, being pregnant. You either are pregnant or you're not pregnant. You can't identify in or out of pregnancy. You can't be half pregnant. But when it comes to ethnicity and race and religion, well, are these immutable characteristics, or are these characteristics of choice or something else? And then there's the protected characteristic of holding a gender recognition certificate, or intending to hold one. Well, that's been utterly corrupted so that it becomes anybody who is interested remotely in self-ID, or anybody who doesn't remotely or who rejects traditional concepts of male and female. So they have the status of being protected. So the Equality Act, whilst it was good in theory, in practice, it's been utterly corrupted.
It's also a slight difficulty for people on, for want of a better word, our side of things, and I think this was true in your case, it's true in many cases. Generally, when we're trying to uphold free speech, we're constantly in a position of having to resort to the very legislative frameworks which we ourselves generally on the right, maybe you don't identify as such, it doesn't really matter, but a lot of people don't care for the Equality Act. A lot of people don't care for the European Convention on Human Rights. Yet we're constantly invoking, particularly Section 10 of the Equality Act, and I forget which section of the European Convention on Human Rights, to do with free speech. We're constantly having to invoke these things, and there's no guarantee in advance that we're going to have our claims upheld because, as we say, the system, in terms of the culture of the system, militates against our free speech rights at scale and generally. How can we? So here's the question: how can we reinforce and clarify what many people thought was a very important seminal achievement of yours in 2021 when you did win that case? How can we fortify that legally?
It's so hard. It's so hard because whilst it is now the law to uphold free speech and Article 10, by the way, Article 10 is a qualified right, so we don't have absolute free speech. You can't shout fire in a crowded building, for instance, and we would never argue for that.
Unless there is a fire.
Yeah, unless there's a fire, then you're kind of obligated to, haven't you? Compelled speech. Yeah, exactly. Then the problem we have is upholding it, because in 2019 and 2020, when I took the College of Policing, in fact the government, to the High Court, I was simply trying to uphold a law that was already there. But to do that, I had to risk round about £250,000 to do that, with no guarantee of success at all. Now, what normal person can do that? What member of the public, what person on the Clapham omnibus, which is the general standard, has got access to £250,000 or is prepared to risk their house, as I was, in order to fight a very marginal issue. Who can do that? Who can do that? Now, I honestly, genuinely believe that having won that, it would then be rolled out across the nation, that police chiefs would embrace it, they would teach their constables, and we would have this great euphoric experience of the police only tackling crime, whilst the rest of us discussed controversial ideas, immune from police involvement. And it simply hasn't been the case. So what we do about it, I don't know. That's the long and the short of it. I think one of the things that we can do is threaten the police with action, because they're now on the back foot. They know that the law is on our side, not their side. So it may be that if we threaten them with judicial review, if we threaten them, then and we quote the relevant paragraphs out of my rulings, etc., that they will back off. I mean, we have a fair amount of evidence that that is the case, that when challenged, the non-crime hate incident is removed from a person's record. But it's still not the same as it never having been there in the first place, is it? It still requires positive action from you, the member of the public, to get rid of this blight upon your name. And I think that is fundamentally unfair. And under the new regime, with Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer, it's only going to get worse, because in complete defiance of the law, in complete defiance of the Courts of Appeal, Yvette Cooper is now re-encouraging police to collect more non-crime hate incidents, not less. She's no interest at all in upholding Article 10. And I think this stems from Keir Starmer's instinct as a prosecutor. I mean, he's just got over telling the world and his wife that he's the son of a toolmaker. And he's now not missing a single opportunity to tell everybody that for a number of years he was director of public prosecutions, and that it's his instinct to prosecute, it's his instinct to lock people up, it's his instinct not to let them out, etc. Well, I think that is not the role of a prime minister. That is the role of a prosecutor. Now, this is important. I'll tell you why. In this country, we have an adversarial system, our judiciary. You have a prosecutor whose job it is to show that the other side are guilty in their actions, guilty in their minds, and to destroy any possible mitigation or defence. On the other side, of course, they've got a defence lawyer who tries to say either he didn't do it or he didn't mean to do it, or if he did do it and he didn't mean to do it, these are the mitigating reasons why. Okay. What Starmer is doing, I think, is he is viewing the entire world, and certainly this country, through a prosecutor's eyes. So that there are the sheep who follow him. There are the sheep who agree with everything he says, or who certainly won't make a noise about it. And then there are goats. There are those who he categorized following the riots as evil. He did. He just categorized them as evil. He knew their mindset. He was able to discern their mindset as being evil and said there is no place for them. In other words, he was acting as a director of public prosecutions. He was telling us all that we were guilty, even though rioters hadn't been to court yet, even though in many cases they'd not been even questioned, yet let alone found guilty. He knew, and Yvette Cooper knew, the mindset of these people. He knew that they were engaged in a dangerous ideology, and he was absolutely certain that he was going to criminalise them one way or another and get them through the justice system as fast as possible and get them off the streets. That is the mind of a prosecutor. It is not the mindset of a prime minister. The job of a prime minister to not just look at the causes of crime, but to look at the causes of crime. Now, back in the old days of socialism, there was this concept of alienation, where if there were rioters out on the streets and people doing bad things, burning cars, throwing bricks, of course it was treated as crime, but there was at least an attempt to look at what was motivating these people. And there was this concept of alienation. People felt alienated from the wider society. I think Keir Starmer needs to get back to his socialist roots and start thinking about the fact that these riots did not happen in a vacuum. They happened because people feel alienated from the justice system. They feel alienated when they see innocent victims, like in Southport. But it's not just Southport, is it? It's over and over again. They feel alienated from that. They feel as though the state is letting them down and everybody else down. They feel alienated when there is uncontrolled immigration. They feel alienated when they walk into an NHS hospital, certainly south of the border, and find it populated by temporary staff, agency staff, many of whom can't speak English. They feel alienated. And I think that if Keir Starmer wants to be true to his socialist principles, he needs to begin to tackle this sense of alienation that many British people now feel, because that sense of alienation and the riots that we saw on the streets are, as far as I'm concerned, connected.
It's one of the hallmarks of socialism, though, or socialism in practice at least, is that the intellectual vanguard of socialism are only ever interested in a certain kind of alienation. They're always liable to dismiss other kinds. Connor, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think actually he is being true to his socialist roots in a certain regard, and his view of human nature as purely a product of education and economic circumstances. And so this is why he keeps discrediting the original alienating causes of the civil unrest that we saw recently. And again, we time and time again on this channel said, don't go down there, not only to not engage in criminal behaviour, because we can't condone that, but also don't give the state, which already wants to crack down on you, an excuse to look for doing so. But he won't regard those as legitimate, because he fundamentally believes that every single new arrival, even the most arch jihadian or imported miscreant, would be as British as you or I, peaceful, law-abiding, loving human rights, if not the far-right racists kept reminding them that they're all different. So all they need to do is censor them, chill them with non-crime hate incidents, and lock them up for the harshest possible periods, and then we'll all be singing Kumbaya and holding hands. I do think that's what's motivating that, and I think that's the same sort of thing that was motivating not just pure risk aversion, of course, on behalf of the police officers, but the same ideology that is motivating the College of Policing, the officers themselves. They just think if they put bigotry back in the closet, that everyone will just be egalitarian and all sing John Lennon's Imagine.
Yeah, I think you're wrong. I think that singing Kumbaya will always be viewed as a non-crime agent and not a crime. I think singing Allah Akbar will perhaps be celebrated, but certainly not Kumbaya. This is the problem with socialism, that it has a utopian ideal that has no bearing whatsoever on human nature. And so it's an effort to conform to the utopia. And if you don't make the effort, or don't at least act as though you're making the effort, and are seen to be making the effort, and put up the symbols and emblems and the flags of your efforts, then you're sent to the gulag. That's it. Nobody believes, I don't think, very few people believe in this LGBTQ plus nonsense. Nobody believes that human beings can change sex, or that there are 97 genders. No one does. But everybody is forced into pretending that they do as a sign of obedience to the state. That's it. And we see the flags everywhere. I travelled down to London this morning on a bloody LGBTQI plus painted train. It was only because you're so important, Connor, that I didn't refuse to get on it. So, but under old socialist regimes, under Stalin, under Mao, the reason that the portraits were everywhere, the reason that flags and colours were everywhere, the reason that there was chanting and a certain form of words that you had to repeat, was not because people believed it, but it was because the state needed to remind you that resistance is futile, that this is so all-pervading, that this ideology is everywhere, that this statism is so much bigger than you, and resistance by you and your little friends is completely and utterly futile. That's the overriding message of the flags, the symbols, the language, the multicoloured trains, the Pride months, the LGBTQI trans history months that we have. I mean, every single week, every single month, there's something to remind us that resistance is futile. And I think Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper are are fully aware of this. I don't think they are left-wing, at all. I think they are the far right. I think the Starmer government is far right.
I would push back on the use of that phrase, because I think what they say to mean as far right is anyone whose culture, history, love of family, love of place and faith is indigestible in the multicultural melting pot. And so they see that as indistinguishable from the Nazis. I don't think those two are the case. I think you can be a British patriot without needing to don boots and goose step, but they clearly don't. I do think, as you are, they're delusional socialists or extreme progressive liberals. I think we should be precise about using that.
Well, I think that, people have a hissy fit when you point out that the National Socialist Party of Germany was a socialist party, and it was a socialist party with added bits of racism attached to it. I had an argument with someone the other day who said, the chief architect of privatization was Hitler. But what Hitler did, when his idea of privatization was pulling down the monopolies of the super large companies to put it back in the hands of much smaller companies. It's not the privatization that you and I talk about.
But they're all party members.
Where it goes from state to the individual. Hitler's privatization was breaking up the large companies, the large monopolies, and handing it back to much smaller groups of people. The difference between socialism and National Socialism is so minute, it's simply not worth talking about.
I very strongly disagree.
As do I.
I really do. Okay, so I think that there's a very, very key anthropological difference. They both share that utopian cast of mind that you were talking about earlier. But in the case of the Soviet communists of the last century, and what I would want to call the sort of race communists of today, where they've sort of swapped out the proletariat for the kind of the third world global south, and that's their new proletariat as they see it. They are social engineers. They view themselves as engineering a social utopia by changing the educational system, by trying to they believe that they're fundamentally Rousseauian. They think that all problems in human life result from the institutions that men have made for themselves, and that therefore what we need to do is re-engineer those institutions, and then human nature will blossom in the way that it has been hindered from blossoming by the institutions as they are in their corrupted form. The Nazis were biological utopians. They, for example, technically, even though the socialists, the communists in Russia would be very happy to persecute kulaks and to hang them from the trees, because these were the successful peasants who were sort of holding back the dream of egalitarianism in the countryside. They would obviously commit those atrocities, but at their fundamental anthropology, there was no reason for the socialists to think that a kulak couldn't reform himself, possibly, if he really.
I would agree with that.
But in the Nazi case, that was not the case with what they regarded as Volksfremde, these people who were alien elements who could not be redeemed. There was still. This is, I think, why Nazism strikes us as more wrong, because the defective elements on Nazi criteria cannot be reformed. They cannot be re-engineered. They just need to be exterminated. Whereas in the socialist case, you are at least provisionally given an ability to get with the new program.
I think, again,
you're only killed off if you don't.
Again, academically, theoretically, you're correct. But practically, biological essentialism and structural essentialism have exactly the same result. Because you can look at the death counts under Hitler, and then you can look at the death count under Mao and under Stalin, etc., and you tell me the difference, the practical difference. I don't see a practical difference. When it comes to the practical outworkings of a state, I don't think it matters at all whether it is a committed socialist state or a committed far-right state. I think the chances of you dying and being suppressed under that system are equal, or one may be worse than the other.
Yes, I'm certainly in no mood to defend 20th century totalitarianism, whether it takes a social form or a biological form. But this is why one of the things as well, so as well as that potentially quite tedious theoretical gloss I gave on National Socialism as compared with Soviet communism, is also important not to play into the language games that our opponents like to set up for us. And if we're constantly entrenching in the public discourse this idea that the far right is this boogeyman, that we're constantly surrendering the language game to the left as well, which is also something which I wouldn't want to do. I would want to try and mainstream a term like race communist to describe these people, rather than fall back on the far right language. I think it's also tactically more defensible as well as theoretically more defensible.
Yeah, I just think whichever. I mean, I don't understand why it is that you can wander around with a Chairman Mao T-shirt on.
Yes.
No problem at all. You can wander around with a Stalin T-shirt on at all. You can't even buy a Hitler T-shirt off Amazon because I've tried. And the reason that I've tried is because,
find out if this double standard
I
exists.
wanted to run an experiment where I walked into a pub, the same pub, one day wearing a Mao T-shirt, one day wearing a Stalin T-shirt, one day wearing a Hitler T-shirt. I was going to conduct a social experiment to see what the reaction was.
Yes.
Couldn't do it because I'm getting a Hitler T-shirt. But I had no problem at all getting a Mao T-shirt and a Stalin T-shirt and what have you. Why is that? You talk about the re-engineering of society and the re-engineering of language. Why is it that Stalin and Mao and Pot are not synonymous with evil in exactly the same way that Hitler is? And that's why I say, from a practical outworking, if you're a member of the proletariat, then it may be that under one regime you're more at risk by dint of your colour or your religion or whether you're circumcised or not. Under another regime, it may be that you're more at risk because you happen to be a farmer or you happen to have a parent who like Beethoven and you're viewed as dangerously bourgeois. From a practical point of view, I see no difference at all, and that's why I think it's absolutely right, or you can call this current government either far left or far right. I'm quite happy to use either term, in all honesty, because I think it makes no difference whatsoever.
I do think far left is more accurate, but I think we are all in agreement that the irony of accusing you of being on the precipice of a trans genocide for tweeting out a lyric is that ultimately, ineluctably, their designation of their critics as class enemies is a genocidal ideology.
It is.
And I don't think it's too extreme to say that this government, were they not constrained by various outward overtures to human rights, would see no problems mass imprisoning and allowing to die off their political opponents. So I think you're absolutely right on that.
They are. I think they are hell-bent on any form of dissent, seeing that as criminal. Now, get back to the non-crime hate instance,
yes.
the definition of hate as set out by the government and the police includes ill will, ill feeling, dissent, and antagonism. Okay, dislike as well. They are criminalising perfectly normal human emotions.
They're all quite nebulous synonyms as well.
Nebulous synonyms. It's quite fine. I can dislike who I like. I can have ill feeling towards people. My goodness, politicians have ill feeling towards other politicians all the time, not just the opposing party, but the factions within a party. So how is that hate? How is that recordable hate? But it gets worse than that. Antagonism is a fundamental part of a British democracy. Our entire judicial system is based on antagonism. It's based on a prosecution, a defence. The two go head to head in battle and the winner takes all. It's antagonistic. Our parliament is based on antagonism. We have the government benches, we have the opposition benches, and we have two swords lengths between them, and we have a speaker sitting there to shout order, order. So the hatred, they don't try to eradicate the hatred, they try to manage the hatred, because hatred is a fundamental part of human nature, and it is a fundamental and necessary part of a democracy when you define hatred as including dislike and antagonism. Without antagonism, we would have no democracy, and without antagonism, we would have a very, very deficient judicial system.
Final question for you, Harry. Thank you so much for joining us. What would you encourage viewers who potentially find themselves in an exposed position, whether in the private sector or indeed in the public sector, to do if they feel victimized by the chilling effect or if they're being persecuted and hunted down in more overt ways?
Right, okay. So if you get a knock on your door and it's the police or the counter-terrorist unit, just do a quick mental check in your head. Have you committed a crime? Do you think that you have committed a crime? Do you think that you have said something? Does something immediately spring to mind that you think, oh shit, it's that? They're here about that. Mm-hmm. If you can't identify what they're here for, it's a fair bet that neither can they. It's a fair bet that they are simply operating because somebody has reported something that you've said to the police and they feel the need to go out and check your thinking and tell you to bite your tongue. The very first thing you do is this. You say, are you here to investigate a crime or a non-crime? You get that. Whatever the answer is, you make sure you tape it. You pull out your phone, you press record, and you record the entire thing. If it's a non-crime that they're there to talk to you about, you have the option at that point of telling them to piss right off, shut the door in their face and forget about it. Alternatively, you can play along and get as much information out of them as possible, then get hold of Fair Cop. Send us the tape, we'll have a listen to it, and then we'll advise you from there on. But I think that's what we ought to do. First things first, if you haven't been accused of a crime, if the police aren't there to interview you about a crime, you have the option of just telling them to piss off and shut the door.
If they say it is a crime?
If they say it is a crime, then what you need to do, again, is turn on your tape recorder. You need to ask them what crime, get as much information out of them as possible. If they say, will you come for a voluntary interview, say yes at a future date. And in that interim period, you talk to me and you talk to a solicitor. And again, if it's a voluntary interview, you'll be able to take your tape recorder in there and you'll be able to tape it yourself so that you can then listen back and you can, more importantly, share with me and a solicitor to what you've actually been accused of, because there's a fair chance that they won't even be within the foothills of criminality. You know, very often we see this, we see the police dismiss a case, say there was insufficient evidence to proceed to prosecution. The trouble is, very often there is insufficient evidence to even begin an investigation. And they know that when they begin the investigation, but they do it because they want you to bite your tongue. They want to cause a chilling effect on your free speech. They want you to believe that you've done something wrong without any evidence. And that way, they social engineer you into silence and compliance. And I don't think that's right.
Harry Miller, thank you very much for joining us on Deprogrammed. Connor, thank you as ever. You've been watching Deprogrammed. Make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment if you wish to do so, and we shall see you on the next one.
Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.